Thank you for joining us today. I'm Helen Jung with the Oregonian's Editorial Board, and with me is Amy Wong. We are talking with members of the Yes on 107 campaign. And if you guys wouldn't mind starting off and telling us what Measure 107 is about and why voters should vote for it.
Sure, I'll take the lead. In 2019, the Oregon legislature, the last day of the session, referred to the voters a constitutional referral, which does three things. Number one, it explicitly states that you can have caps on political donations. Number two, it says that you can have caps on expenditures, how much can be expended by a campaign. And number three, it states that you can allow top donors to be disclosed in advertising. Back in 1997, the Oregon Supreme Court had made a decision which said that caps on political donations were a violation of our state free speech clause. So this was designed by the Oregon legislature to give the voters a chance to overturn that. Simultaneously, from a campaign that I helped run in Multnomah County, the Oregon Supreme Court in April of this year reversed that 97 decision and said that that political contributions are not actually speech. That they reversed themselves. And so now what we're doing is campaigning on Measure 107 with a large coalition of 60 plus organizations working on this to win by as big a margin as possible to send a message to the legislature and to all the voters that we're tired of being one of only 5 states in the whole country with no limits on money in politics. Our gubernatorial campaign in 2018, the highest race spending on the governor's race was 18 million. They spent 38 million, more than double in 2018. So it shows you how big an influence here in Oregon unlimited donations are. We're number one in corporate donations per capita at the legislature. The Center for Public Integrity ranked Oregon 49th of all 50 states, 49th in how we politically finance our elections, second only to Mississippi. So that's not the kind of place that we think of ourselves here as a progressive state. We think this is a bipartisan issue. We've got polling to back that up. In Multnomah County and in the city of Portland, measures to put caps on political donations passed with 89% and 87.6% in 2016 and 2018. The reality is that 90% of the time, the person with the most money wins the election. That's what happens. And this is going to be an opportunity to help level the playing field, to give Oregonians the ability to create a structure of what we want to do to get big money out of politics. And I'll let Sunny take it from there.
Thank you, Jason. Well, first, I'd like to toss it over to Marshall, but my name is Sunny Mehta. I'm the campaign manager.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Marshall Hirschfield. I'm the political director at Apano. I think this measure is really important to pass because just looking at the candidates that we've endorsed this cycle, it's very difficult for BIPOC candidates to raise money and be competitive with opponents who receive large donations from corporations. And this became very apparent when COVID-19 hit, right? And a lot of it is now forced to go into digital organizing, which the more money you have, essentially you do get to purchase your seat because your outreach is a lot larger. When we think of BIPOC candidates and the grassroots organizing that they have to do, families cannot afford to match the donations of these corporate dollars. We have folks that are unemployed. We have folks affected by COVID, affected by the wildfires, and yet we want to push these BIPOC candidates to have a fair chance at being elected because they are representative of the communities that they serve. And I think by being closest to the problems, they are also closest to the solution. This election cycle alone, we see a lot of first times that are happening in these races with like Con Pham, Nafisa Fai, Jackie Leung. And it's insane to think that only in 2020 are we now seeing a lot of first-timers having access to the legislature.
Great, thank you. Sunny, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that like right now, the rules are rigged. I mean, we know the incredible amount of money that's being spent on our campaigns and elections isn't just it also translates to lobbying. When drug companies make large political contributions, we all pay the price with higher prescription drug prices. When major polluters use big money to influence elections and policy, we all pay the price with weaker clean air regulations. And until we end the role of big money in politics, we won't be able to make government work for all of us. Right now, the rules are rigged and we don't have a democracy that works for all of us. But we have an opportunity to set the stage for that reform by winning by a huge margin and giving the legislature a mandate to take on strong reform that isn't going to be filled with loopholes, that is going to be strong, that is going to allow for women, people of color, and BIPOC communities to actually run and win office. And we can have a government and a democracy that is more representative of the people that they represent.
So if I understand correctly, this it's not necessarily necessary at this point because of the Supreme Court ruling. Is that right?
Sort of. So a couple things. Supreme Court did not touch on whether disclosing top donors could be a violation of state free speech. So this would cement that piece of it so that that's not an issue anymore, that someone could challenge at a statewide. Number two, Supreme Court's changed, right? The 97 court that threw out the limits on political contributions was reversed this year. So we think it's important that we pass this because then it's cemented and no future courts can change it again without another vote of the people. So for two reasons, I think that this is still an essential constitutional referral to make sure we put into the Constitution.
So let's say voters pass this and then it goes to the legislature to actually draw up the limits or what is allowed, what's not. What assurances do Oregonians have that they are actually going to be implementing limits that are significant and are fair, that help create the fair playing field that you're talking about?
Well, I think it's going to be incumbent on all of us as Oregonians to make sure that we let the legislature know and communicate with the legislature as to what we want to see. And I expect that there's going to be a robust coalition that is formed, especially building off the work that we've been doing on this ballot measure campaign to get that reform. Marshall and Jason can talk a little bit more about that, but it is going to take a lot of work, and there is no guarantee. We can win by 90. We could every single person could vote yes on this measure, and it is still incumbent on the legislature to take that action. And we know, as we are here right now on this ballot measure campaign, that there are other ways to influence the conversation for the legislature, whether that be another stronger ballot measure in the wing to help make sure the legislature is held accountable to passing comprehensive reform, or making sure that there is an inclusive process that sets the stage for ultimately passing legislation in 2022 in the short session. I think there are a lot of unanswered and lingering questions out there, but I know that advocates and supporters for this measure aren't going to rest on their laurels, and that we'll all be running through the tape.
Are there, and so for instance, there could be, for instance, another ballot measure to follow this if the legislature either doesn't come up with something or comes up with something that's unsatisfactory.
Yeah, I would say that, I did a lot of work in 2019. There was a limits bill that I thought had some pretty serious flaws because it had still had 4 or 5 different ways that unlimited money could flow to candidates. And I think that there will be a big fight, because I watched what happened in 2019. The established big money interests will try to water down and dilute any limits bill in the legislature. And frankly, getting good policy out of the legislature is hard. The Republicans can walk out if they decide to, as an example. So I'm not convinced we can get it done at the legislature in terms of making real campaign finance reform, meaning, good limits that average people can understand, combined with, no loopholes to getting, unlimited money. But if we can't, that's one of the beautiful things about this ballot measure. We're going to build off of this campaign and all the organizational support we have here to take it back to the voters in 2022 at the ballot if we have to.
Great, thank you. Have you seen much, I've only seen a couple arguments in opposition. I think they're all from the same person. Have you heard either from, either informally or formally of any significant opposition?
Yeah, Kyle Markley, who's running for Secretary of State, he did submit 14 voter pamphlet statements. He spent about $17,000 on that. He's now running paid ads against the ballot measure, and has made it his personal crusade to stop this measure, and has been waiting for it for some time. Other than that, after the Supreme Court decision, we saw, and I think this is also going to speak as to who's going to be involved in advocating in the legislative session. The business community signaled that they were welcoming a conversation post the April Oregon Supreme Court decision of a discussion on campaign finance reform and limits. And I think we all know that the spectrum of campaign finance reform and democracy reform policies that Oregon can take on and tackle and pass in the coming years is huge. There is a laundry list of items for Oregon to pass, whether it be from disclosures, for limits, public financing, strengthening the ban on foreign money. We have a lot that we can do to make our system better, more transparent, and accessible for all.
And Helen, I do want to point out for any of the voters out there watching this interview, there is something terribly misleading that Mr. Markley did in those voter pamphlet statements. He lists about 10 organizations with quotes from 14 years ago, back in 2006. Where they are talking about voting no on a constitutional referral. It's misleading. Almost all of these organizations now endorse this measure, and this includes AFSCME, the American Federation of Teachers, NARAL, Planned Parenthood, Oregon Education Association. A lot of the big power players are now in support of this, and part of that is because they saw the corrupting influence of money in politics, especially after 2010 and Citizens United. And just how much money has flooded into our political system in the last 15 years.
But some of those organizations are some of the largest contributors in Oregon, let's be clear.
No, absolutely, they are. And they're supporting this constitutional referral. My point is they're listed by Kyle in a very misleading way, as it looks like they're in opposition to this in the voter pamphlet statement, when they're not.
And in terms of kind of looking forward about what kinds of limits should there be, can you kind of give an overall, and I know this doesn't relate specifically to the passage of this ballot measure, but what are the hallmarks, do you think, of an effective, fair campaign contribution limit system? I guess what are some of the elements that you think would be necessary to include?
I guess we can each take our own stab. I'll give my personal perspective. I think a contribution limit should be something that an average Oregonian thinks that's something that they could afford, right? So whether you figure out at some sort of median income level what someone makes in an average month and what they might be able to afford as a discretionary item, I personally think something around the neighborhood of $500 for a state legislature or a state Senate seat, and maybe something around $1,000 for statewide races would be fair limits. I'm open, to other ideas. I do think if we get up and you're at the federal limit level, I think that's too high. I mean, the federal limits are $2,800. And that means 2,800 times 2, because you get to give it once in the primary and once, and then between a husband and wife, suddenly you've given $10,000. So I think the federal limits are too high. I would support limits in that neighborhood, but I think the most important thing about the limits is making sure there's no loopholes so that unlimited money can still flood into the races.
Michelle, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, really to echo Jason, when you think of just the amount of money that goes into campaigns and how many touches folks are able to have with constituents because of having no limits, by having any type of cap on it really levels the playing field with access to an auto dialer to do phone and text bank outreach on how many mailers folks are able to send out. So I don't know exactly what that amount should be, but just from the grassroots organizing and the things that I'm able to see as political director and serving API communities, majority of the folks want to be served by BIPOC leaders, people who look like them and people who have the Oregonians with their best interest in mind. And we don't see that currently, or I personally don't see that currently with who represents me. And so I don't know what those limits will be, but I'm excited to continue that conversation. And kind of to go back to the other point, you know, I do think that BIPOC-led organizations will be at the core of helping create that limit, especially having a lot of conversations with the endorsement process and how we continue our work through legislative sessions.
And on the campaign side, it's a fairly easy answer that we are agnostic officially when it comes to what limits would look like. But I know, and just personally, and from the conversations I've had from our steering committee on the campaign and the diverse voices that are represented in this campaign, by and large, it has to be all encompassing. It's no limits policy specifically, no matter how high or low that you make it will fit everything that we need to pass in 2021. So I think that there's always going to have to be something, there's going to have to be a component to any package of reform or reform that is going to also allow women, people of color, and Black, Indigenous communities to not just participate in democracy, but represent and be a part of the government. I'd just add to that I think we've, with the ballot measure, we've really set the stage, I think, for the legislature to have this conversation. I think in a lot of states across the country, what we've learned from working with and learning from national groups working on campaign finance reform and Citizens United, for one, that it's always going to require a unique policy state by state to ensure that what we pass isn't exactly the same as Washington. And there are a lot of, fortunately for Oregon, because we've taken so long to get this far, we have a lot of states to look towards as examples to make sure that we don't or fall into the same pitfalls and perils as other states, and we can design a policy that's going to be successful and effective.
And I'm sorry, if you can remind me, so it's not just contributions, it's disclosure. Is it also spending as well, the authority to issue spending limits?
Yeah, I think the language says that it's not a violation of free speech or whatever to put a cap on political contributions, to put caps on expenditures, and to allow disclosure of top donors. Those are the three basic elements of the referral.
Great.
I think Citizens United governs the expenditures piece. Yeah.
I think I'm pretty much all set. Amy, are you set?
Yeah, I'm good. I did have some questions, but they've all been addressed during this meeting so far, so thank you.
Thanks so much for taking time to talk with us about this. We'll be issuing our endorsements on measures believe this coming Wednesday. So thank you very much.
Great. And then question, is this going to be, this was recorded, is it going to be posted online?